Eric from Ember. You're watching Aftershocks TV.
Alrighty, Matt and Tom. Oh man, damn, what was that? All right, Matt and Tom, we're back here with you folks for another episode of Aftershocks TV, right here on the CMS network. Man, maybe it was that. Maybe the cologne's rubbing off from Carl into my throat or something there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't say cheap cologne. I said his cologne. Just Carl, in case you're looking back on this. But yeah, that was a great interview. Coming soon, everybody.
Yes, we just spoke with literally right before we started this. We spoke with legendary drummer from the Rods, Mr. Carl Kennedy, also legendary producer, not just a drummer. I mean, he's produced, so many of those, thrash and speed metal records in the 80s, classics, Anthrax, Overkill, Exciter, even Blue Cheer, did a Blue Cheer record, which
is going way back.
Yeah. So how you doing, Tom? Good to see you, man. As always, how's your week been? Good?
It's been a good metal week. We'll talk about, we're going to just have some fun here, talk about stuff that we've got scripted, talk about stuff that just enters our big fat heads. Whatever we decide to discuss, it's going to be the course of the day. But it's been a good week, my friend, and happy that it's Friday and looking forward to just turning off that damn computer and having a few beers and relaxing for the weekend. It's my plan.
Oh, yes. Likewise, man. Same here. And, real quick, too, I just want to let the audience know and the viewers and listeners know, I know last week with our episodes, we were short on one, and it unfortunately had to do with the interview that we had scheduled.
Right.
That, I'm not going to say the band or whatever. You can go and check it out, who we were supposed to, interview. I think we mentioned it on the first segment last week. But it was a pretty big flake out, I would say, a real dick move if you ask me. But unfortunately, when we do this and this, these kind of show interviews and so forth, a lot you'll unfortunately get that a lot. We'll get flake outs. It's just sometimes it's just really I'm not going to harp on this too long, but it's a little frustrating because we, guys like me and Tom here, we don't just go ahead, turn on the computer and sit down with an interviewer, someone we're interviewing with, and just say, hey, man, so you're in this band. Wow. Well, what was the first piece of music you listened to as a kid? When did you first play the guitar, your first lick? We don't just come up with these stupid shit. We really get into the history, and we really want to ask some good questions. So when we spend time and, someone just flakes and doesn't show up and they confirm, yeah, that irks me a little bit. So, so just wanted to say, that's why we didn't have that one episode up last week. One segment, I should say, the interview. But like I said, this week we've got Carl Kennedy from the Rods, so we're really excited that everyone out there is going to be able to check that out this week. So this past weekend, I just want to also mention real quick, Tom. I haven't really said this to on Aftershocks yet or any of the podcasts, that I have been working actually on a documentary, and I'll talk more about it down the road once it gets closer to completion. I don't really like to talk about it, in the earlier stages. But I was, out of town in Fresno, California, out here, which is a couple hours from where I am here in the Bay Area, to film one of the featured musicians. That's going to be in the documentary. William Trevor Church is his name. I don't know if people are familiar with his band Haunt, who is actually really one of the leaders in this new wave of traditional heavy metal genre that's been kind of burgeoning slowly but surely. I would say over the last decade, we are seeing a lot of younger bands, a lot of younger musicians are returning to that classic metal, new wave of British heavy metal sound, from the late 70s, early 80s. And Haunt is one of those bands, that's really leading the charge. And it was really cool talking with Trevor, because Trevor, he's also the son. He's not just this musician. He's the son of a legendary bassist, Bill the Electric Church, and who, Tom, I know you're a big, huge Sammy Hagar fan. And Bill, of course, he played on all those classic Hagar records. VOA he was on. Obviously, he was also on the first Montrose record, and which was their classic record. And he also played with Van Morrison. I don't know how familiar you are with Van Morrison, but the song "Wild Nights," it's got that real iconic bass lick.
Yep.
Do 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 do. That bass, and he's the one that came up with that lick. He was on that record. I actually got to hold that bass guitar. I was at Trevor's house. He has that bass where that song was played on. So it's always kind of cool too when you get to hold on to a real piece of rock history. It was really cool. So he had all this more memorabilia there. I mean, he had a Sammy Hagar tour jacket from like 1983 that was custom made. So just a real plug for him too. Here it is, the book right here, Build the Electric Church. It's out now. Martin Popoff, the great, of course, classic metal writer, did the book and so forth. So yeah, man. So it was really just cool, checking out all that, all these old flyers and all these old, press passes that he had. I mean, Trevor really, had it all, done up. I mean, he really is a not just a great musician, but he's also a music fan. Obviously, growing up with a rock star dad like that. So, but anyway. Now, another thing I want to bring up, we have, we like to take things that fans send to us or comments they make and so forth. And so one of our listeners here made a comment about Tom and talked about Tom.
He did.
That you look a little bit like an Irish journalist, Dave Fanning. Who's Dave Fanning? Let everyone know who Dave Fanning is.
Yeah,
Tom.
Dave Fanning is a very prominent Irish journalist dating back, I would say, to the late 1970s. And, his knowledge of, he's not like a rock and metal guy, even though I've seen him interview, rock and metal bands, but very, very, his knowledge of the music business and industry is tremendous. He'll talk about the second track from David Bowie's second album and talk about the nuances of the track. He's that guy, right? But we did get, I was responding to some comments on YouTube, and thank you for the engagement, everybody. We appreciate that. And somebody said something along the lines of, hey, Tom looks like Dave Fanning. Tom will know who he is, right? So I suppose I was just chatting with Matt about this. And of course, Matt he said, oh, well, I'm going to take an opportunity. See, dude.
When he first put that, I went and looked real quick online. I was like, nah, not really. But I'm telling you, the more I look at it, I'm looking at you, I'm like, I do see a little. I think he's right. There is a bit of a resemblance there, man.
He's far more handsome than I, so he can take that. But Dave, here's a guy that I could find him, send that segment to, and get him on, because there's
oh, really?
You go looking for clips of Phil Lynott. You'll find Dave Fanning interviewing Phil Lynott in the late 1970s, early 1980s. So he's very prominent. And just one more thing you said about Van Morrison. Van Morrison is Irish.
He's Irish, yes.
He is, yes. So the greats from Ireland, of course, you've got Dave Fanning, obviously, Bono and Thin Lizzy and Rory Gallagher, Gary Moore. The list is endless of the great musicians coming from the Emerald Isles. So maybe we do a segment on that one day. So that would be an interesting.
I was just thinking the same thing, I mean, I remember we did have a couple of years ago, we did do an interview with Ricky Warwick. We got into some of that. We didn't get into deep with it, obviously, because we were talking more about his record. But we did do a little bit of exploration into some of the great Irish, rock musicians in our time. Absolutely, yeah.
And actually, there's a great interview that Bob did with two Bobs. Bob Nalbandy, and our brother, and Bob Daisley. And he was speaking about Bob Daisley released a tribute album probably 3 years ago now, a Gary Moore tribute. And Bob was talking about the Irish sound that was embedded in Gary Moore's playing. That's a great interview. It's on Aftershocks. Go back and listen to Bob Nalbandy and Bob Daisley. And he speaks about Rory Gallagher and Phil Lynott and all that goes great Irish greats. It's a great interview. Of course, Bob Daisley has stories for days. And of course, Bob Nalbandy is the ultimate interviewer. So great teamwork there.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, here in the States, a lot of, whether it's Rory Gallagher, I mean, even Thin Lizzy,
sure.
Like you said, I mean, they're known here. If you ask people here, Thin Lizzy, they're going to tell you Jailbreak and the boys are back in town. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's it. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed that yourself since
all
you've
the
been
time
here in the States, right? Yeah. And so it's interesting how a lot of the, those musicians, Rory Gallagher, same thing, a lot of people don't even know Rory or Gary Moore. They don't know a lot of these, Irish musicians here. I mean, obviously all the British musicians were big here.
Sure.
But for some reason, a lot of the Irish ones kind of got skipped over. I don't know if it's maybe because they didn't, come over here much so far. I mean, I know with Phil and Thin Lizzy, they had moved to LA in the 80s, I know, really to, I think, kind of get more known, in the States, obviously during the golden era there, during the 80s with MTV and everything. But it's still, they just couldn't shake. I mean, they were just so pushing with MTV pushing all the hair metal. It just was, and all that stuff that I think Thin Lizzy just unfortunately didn't really get that recognition they deserved here. They never did.
And you know what, like Thin Lizzy began in late 60s. They were done. Thunder and Lightning was 1983. So their final tour, I think, or the final tour was 83 on the Thunder and Lightning tour. But Lizzy had a lot of false starts. I mean, they were just about, again, I don't know the sequence, but Brian Robertson, fucked up his hand just before a big tour. Tour was cancelled. Gary Moore left mid-tour. Mid-tour was brought into, I think that was on Chinatown, 1980. And then Phil Lynott got hepatitis, if not once, twice. So Lizzy ended up getting a name for being unreliable. But it just circumstance just kicked them in the balls so many different times. But, Lizzy toured with Queen. And, I'm trying to think of the year 77. Maybe I'm out on the sink on the years. That's bad reputation anyway. So, Life and Dangerous period. And even Freddie Mercury was going, Jesus, who are these guys? You know what I mean? So they were just on the cusp of making it. And then there's a great interview with Joe Elliott tells this where, or Rick Savage, I think it was, and they had just released Pyromania, which would have been 83. So Leopard were taking off, Lizzy were going away. And then Phil Lynott said, I can't compete with this. Like they were an old school twin guitar, whatever. And then Leopard came out with this, Mutt Lange production and the hair metal that was coming in. He said, I don't know what to do here. I'm kind of out of my depth a little bit. But I think it was just unfortunate that the timing was wrong. But Lizzy, for me, are probably my all-time favorite band, right up there with Zeppelin. And they're just a band for me just could do no wrong. I know for me, they're just an incredible band. Melodies, stories, lyrics, arrangements. Listen to go back to UFO or Bruce Springsteen. There's a story in there sometime. Maiden. They will tell you that their influences are all like Wishbone Ash and Thin Lizzy kind of personified that twin guitar. And a lot of players today, I can hear Lizzy in so much music today, and I can hear that Lynott influence. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of the, I really enjoy a lot of the heavy rock and the stoner rock stuff. And trust me, there's a lot of bands in that genre with that twin guitar style. Right. I mean, one I was telling you about from San Diego, this band Formula 400, great band. They bring that Thin Lizzy. There's this band War Cloud that used to be up here. They're down in Texas. They're pretty, these bands all have such, huge Thin Lizzy influences. You can't, like you said, when you think of twin guitars, that's what I think of first. That's where you go. Exactly, man. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot, of course, is always going on, Tom, with a lot of stuff going on in rock and metal. Right now, some news. I know there's there's a lot of tours going on, which is great to see. Everybody's back on the road, including an interesting one. That might be a couple of them that might be their final tour. And I think we were talking a little bit about last episode, last week about some final tours. But there's a couple other ones coming up. One being the Lynch Mob, possible final tour for George Lynch and Lynch Mob. I'm gonna call. I don't think that's going to happen. This is my this is my thing. I mean, I've talked. On Aftershocks here over the years, we've talked to George Lynch a few times, and usually when he said something was going to happen, it didn't happen. Like a good example was just the name Lynch Mob. I remember he was talking. We were talking to him, like I said, a couple years ago. He said, yeah, I mean, there's no more Lynch Mob. We asked him about it, and then he, of course, broke that he was going to name his new band George Lynch and the New West, which never came to fruition. And he also said, like you said, he'd never go back to Lynch Mob. So, final tour, I'll take it with a grain of salt till I believe it, because I don't. What else is George gonna? I mean, he does a million things, we know, but I mean, that's his baby. So he's really just putting his own baby to bed, and I just don't see how you can do that if you want to continue to play. Just my opinion. But,
I don't really know why he's doing it, to be honest, because yes, I remember when like George Lynch and Mike Portnoy, they used to get hammered, say 10, 15 years ago, because they were in too many bands. It's like, oh, he's doing this, and he's in KXM, and he was in the Mob, and then obviously Lynch Mob, and then he was jumping in and out of Dokken and whatever. So many bands out there. Dirty Shirley's another one. I'll talk about that in a second. But But now it's kind of the norm because, you know, the music industry's changed so much and Ripper Owens is jumping around bands every 10 minutes. But he says, yeah, I do. Like I've got bills to pay. So yeah, I'm going to do it. So good for him. I like that. But I think about Lynch Mob. First of all, they just released a great album. Their latest album, Babylon, I think it's called. Great album. Absolutely tremendous. With the new singer, obviously, Oni Logan passed on, Jesus, is no longer with the band. So like I said, just announcing that Oni Logan just died on national, you know, on YouTube here. No, he moved on. And I saw them a couple of years ago with Oni Logan and obviously George in New Jersey in a small club. So they were tremendous live. I am a fan and have been. They released an absolute monster few albums, and there's a couple of absolute doozies in there too, so let's put that on the table. But their last, if it is their final album, I think it's a great way to go out on. And I was listening to George, and he stated that they're going to go through until all of this year. The tour has just been announced, and they're going to do, I think they've got some cruises or kind of once offs penciled in for early 2025. But he's adamant there's no more tour. But Ozzy also had a tour called No More Tours, and look what happened to that one. So go figure. I don't know. I don't know.
It's endless the amount of bands who say it's their last tour. It never was. I mean, we can go. I mean, it's endless. I mean, it's so. We could Motley Crue. I mean, we could. Like I said, it's
forever.
You know, we can go
Eagles, Scorpions, Judas Priest, Kiss. Let's go.
Yep.
You know,
just keep it going down. Exactly. So, yeah, like I said, I'll believe it. I mean, maybe like you said, maybe he plans on still playing, but doing more, like you said, the cruises and the festivals,
right?
And maybe not the touring, and maybe he's just getting to that age too, where I think a lot, that's what's going on. Really, it's got to be taxing on these guys just to, especially because, like you just said, you saw Lynch Mob in a smaller club, and so I think for a lot of them, when they hit that age, whether it's their mid to late 60s and above, it's like, okay, like. There's got to be something that just sits in and says, okay, am I going to still just keep coming to these little clubs and playing them? I mean, a guy like George Lynch, he's a big guitarist. He's, I mean, obviously he sold millions of records with his bands over the years. So there is got to be, it's one of those questions where it's like, when if I was in that mindset, and if I was that individual, if I was a musician like that at that, level, and then you've got to, the older you get, the smaller the clubs seem to keep coming, because obviously your fan base is going to whittle away little by little as you get older. I mean, you're going to bring on new fans, of course, but really are kids in their 20s going to go see a 60-something-year-old guitarist play in a small club? I would, but I think a lot of them aren't going to, at that age, right? They're just really concerned about their scene at that age, and they don't really, venture too far away from that. Yep. So it's like, it's got to be, I don't know, sobering, whatever it is. I don't know what the word you would call it, but I can't blame them for of course, doing that, playing these small clubs little by little and going, hey, this is kind of getting the question is, when do you say when? When is it done? And that's really, I think, the hardest thing for all these artists is, I'm sure their intentions are to, you know what, we're done. I can't do this anymore. But then when you're sitting home for a year or two and not doing much, and you've got people, you should, coming to you, whether it's fans, whether it's, journalists, people in the industry, hey, put out, Frontiers is probably coming to George Lynch every year going, hey, well, another Lynch Mob record, we're ready for one if you want. So it's hard to say no then too. So it is, I don't blame these guys for coming back after saying it's their last tour, but I would just say, maybe just don't say it's your last tour. You see this in sports, people retire, right? These athletes, some will do it right after the season. I'm retired. And then they come a month later. No, I can't. I'm coming back. Just let it play itself out. And then you retire when a season comes and then you're not playing. You could say, okay, well, obviously I'm not playing. I'm retired. But to do this, I think they just get ahead of themselves. And maybe it's an emotional thing. And, they just feel defeated. And then a couple of years later, they maybe get reinvigorated. I guess that's kind of how it goes. But
I think, too, if you were to just reverse, he's retiring and his reasons is his own business. But if he was playing to 10 or 15,000 people a night with Lynch Mob, would he be retiring? He wouldn't, his ass. No, so there you go. So there's, you've kind of answered the question. He's, in his 60s, phenomenal player. I'm a huge George Lynch fan. Pretty much everything he's released, almost. There's a few dodgy ones in there, but so he's putting up into some shitty little club in the back ass of nowhere, 400 or 500 people in his 60s, probably not traveling first class, turning up in an Uber going, fuck, Is this really worth it? So you get to the point where the drive is gone. He's probably got decent money in his pocket, maybe from the legacy albums. I don't know, depending on what they did with the money at the time. But he's George Lynch, and he's got other projects that he's going to give attention to. But those projects that he's working on don't require touring, because I think he's just announced that he's going to do an album with Dirty Shirley again, and Dino Jalusic sang on the first one, and Girish. He's Indian. He's with a band called
Girish
Chronicles. Yeah, Girish, right. Who's a phenomenal singer. Actually, I want to do a segment on both of those guys, not today, but just for future reference. He's an amazing singer. He also sang on the latest Joel Hoekstra album, and Firstborn. He's on there. He's
Firstborn,
on that.
That's the one.
Enzo. And he's
Chris Adler, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And obviously he's on with George Lynch. So they're two monumental young rock metal singers that we got to give. So I'd love to get those on for an interview, but I just think George is kind of doing his thing or whatever. And another one, Matt, then is Mr. Big have just announced their farewell tour, and Eric Martin was on Trunk recently talking about that. And Eddie doesn't always, because he's syndicated and he's got to be careful what he says, but he did hold Eric Martin's feet to the fire and go, like, really, are you really doing this? And he said, well, what happens in your last gig and you take a month off and some guy comes back and offers $5 million for a union tour? What's going to happen then? And he said something funny whereby they have the tour dates up, and I think the final tour date is done, and right at the end of that it says request a show. So Eddie was going like, come on. And there were good kind of conversation going on. But look, I'm a Lynch Mob fan. I'm a Mr. Big fan. I saw Mr. Big a couple of times, and one of the best guitar solos I ever saw was Mr. Big. They played in Dublin. Oh man, must be 10 years ago. And he did a tribute to Gary Moore. So Paul Gilbert did a tribute to Gary Moore, and he took all the solos from Victim of Change. I remember getting that mixed up with Priest. I can't remember some of the early Gary. Dirty Fingers, I think it's called. Sorry, my brain is not working today. But anyway, he took all the kind of the great Gary Moore solos and brought him in for a medley on stage, and it was mesmerizing. Probably if not single best guitar solo I've ever seen. A Gary Moore medley by Paul Gilbert. Go figure.
Yeah, Paul Gilbert's phenomenal.
He is. Yeah, what a player. What a player.
Yeah, and I'm not really a Mr. Big fan, but didn't they? When Pat Torpey, the drummer, passed. Yeah, I remember them saying, "Oh, there's no Pat, there's no Mr. Big." I mean, and once again, we hear this all the time too, right? Yep. Someone leaves, okay, the band's done. A couple of years later, someone gives you a big offer, okay, we're back. I mean, it's just, it just happens all the time, and like, well, I just
Matt,
wish,
sorry. One thing too, Matt, is I don't know what venues. I haven't looked at their tour dates. I don't know what size venues they're playing in the US. Are they like a small club band now, or are they
Mr. Big? No, I think they would be playing like the mid-sized clubs. I mean, I think they're still, well, it's hard to say because, once again, that's another band that was huge. Japan, huge, enormous in Japan, Mr. Big.
They just finished a tour in Japan, and they played to 20, they sold out the Budokan, which I think is about 8,000 seats. I know it's an arena by maybe Japan standards, Japanese standards, but they play arenas in Asia.
Yeah. Oh, they're
arenas.
Huge.
So go figure.
They're huge there. And so, and it's interesting because it's an American band, but we here in the States, again, they had sort of the extreme. They had that treatment with Be With You was the song, right? That was the hit. Right. The acoustic little throwaway almost song became their hit. No one really knows them outside of that here. I mean, it's the same type of thing. They're just one of those bands that got, they're much bigger in Europe and in Asia and overseas. They're big, but Mr. Big here, they're pretty Mr. Small in the United States, man. I'll be honest with you. They're not, I mean, no one really talks about them here. I mean, not that I know of. I don't know of anybody that really, like Paul Gilbert, like I said, he is one of the probably, I mean, really, you talk about just an amazing guitar. I mean, he'll just sit there and do anything on the spot. He's just one of those guys that doesn't leave without the guitar in his hand. He just walks around with it all day, almost. But it's almost a shame that he's not really appreciated here like he should be in the States. A lot of those, unfortunately, especially those virtuoso guitarists. I don't know how it is. It was in Europe, but the virtuoso sort of scene here. Had its place in the '80s when Satriani was the guy that led that charge. You had Eric Johnson, and I mean, you said Paul Gilbert. You had all these guys, obviously with the Shrapnel Records, Mike Varney, with all those, with all those great shredders. But it wasn't like it was. I would say it had its day in the early '80s, '83, '84, around that era. But once MTV took over, and then Thrash Metal later came out, and I mean, it's just a lot of the virtuoso. Unless you were a musician, a lot of people really weren't into that music. It didn't, wasn't big on the charts, at all. No. I think Satriani might have gotten a hit on there. Eric Johnson, I think they might have had like one song that maybe got into the top 40 at one point, Billboard, so forth. But it never really resonated with here in the States in terms of like having massive tours playing in bigger venues. Not really here.
Yeah, I think the same in Europe. I mean, obviously I was a big, still am obviously a rock and metal fan, but I remember buying Kerrang. So it got a lot of attention, a lot of press, and Kerrang would always have like this Vai and Satriani and Jason Becker and Marty Friedman, whoever, and like the Mike Varney was often interviewed, but it got press but never got the traction, never really went down. When I bought a lot of those albums, and probably the biggest one, or the biggest two, I guess, would be Steve Vai, Passion and Warfare. That was a big seller back in the day, and Joe Satriani with Surfing with the Alien. If I'm not mistaken, that is a platinum record.
Yes. That one was big.
They were the only two that made the big impact. And I'm a big Joe Sach fan. I have all his stuff. Actually, his last album is quite poor, but overall, I'm a huge Sach fan. Saw him play 5 or 6 times, and they're actually playing. Joe Sach and Steve Vai are on a tour, and they're playing here 2nd of April in Charlotte. So I think I might just, it's probably going to be a $50, $60 ticket, 20 minutes from the house. That's kind of like, why would I not do it? So I'll probably check that out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was actually planning to check out last year Satriani up in Reading with Bob before he had passed. We were planning on going to see Satriani.
I like Sach.
Yeah, because he was living in a small town called Reading, and they don't get a ton of bands that come through, but Satriani was one of them, and I remember it was going to be a big thing.
Nice.
We were planning on going, but yeah, just it's interesting, that whole virtuoso, the guitar virtuoso, thing, the scene. It's very, I know when Aftershocks a couple of years ago we had someone, I forget who exactly it was, but we had one of those guitarists on talking of Sammy Bowlers was his name, who now plays with Kurt Dimer, who we interviewed. And I was asking him about that, because that's where he originally came from, and now he's obviously been playing with, he does that, and then he'll fill in with bands like he's doing with Kurt. And there is, I guess, a seed, but it's all players, which I guess, because the casual fan is not really good. That's not something they're going to really gravitate towards.
No,
is that style of music, it seems, because there's no lyrics really, and there's no, that's the one thing about Yngwie, at least. Yngwie was wise to just put vocals on his music. You kind of have to, if you want to really create a bigger audience, you got to get vocals on a lot of those records. A lot of those early records is so the Joe Satriani's, Eric Johnson, so forth. There was no vocals. It was just guitar.
Yeah,
and drums and bass. But
and I think unfortunately for Malmsteen is he started singing himself, and he's not a bad singer. But again, he had a lot of, obviously he's from Sweden, so a lot of Swedish kind of unknown singers to a degree, probably all called Johan. But there were but his last, like, Malmsteen's last 3 or 4 albums, it's like one big blur of songs. Like, they're not awful. They're just like 4 songs in, you go, I'm done here. His credit, like he's arguably one of the greatest guitar players. I even think he's underrated, because there's nothing. He's classically trained. You've often see all his his solos and his antics on stage and all that kind of thing. And a huge Blackmore fan, we get that. But even though everybody knows who he is, I don't think they quite put him up there with the Hendrix and the Eddie Van Halens and stuff like that. And, I mean,
he doesn't have the hit songs. That's why
he doesn't have the songs. But as a player, I mean, he's just undeniably just extraordinary. But he's his own person, and his Alcatraz tour days and all that kind of thing. But he's got a great legacy. But his new albums, they're not bad. They're just not good enough, and I think it's a detriment to him. And they always have shitty production. I don't know what it is with production. It's always crappy production, always. So that just kills it for me.
Yeah, no, and the thing about, so Yngwie, yes, of course, technically he's phenomenal, right? But once again, can you write a song that's going to stick in someone's head? And that's the thing about
Not
the
anymore.
virtuoso, guitarists. They don't, and of course, is they don't usually have those songs that stand the test of time because they're not catchy hits.
Nope.
If you go and you look at, like I say, that's why they always say you don't have to be the best at your instrument to write great songs. So yes, if you're a guitarist, you love probably watching and listening to Yngwie because of just all the technical stuff he can do on the guitar. But like I said, that's not something that you're going to be humming to yourself in your car or when you walk. It's not going to be in your head.
Forgettable, yeah.
It's really it's a niche thing, and that's the thing about it. It's very niche. It's real driven towards musicians who love that kind of stuff. I'm not saying there's fans that don't like it; they appreciate it, but it's just never going to translate to having big hits. The thing about it, and then the other thing I noticed too with a lot of those albums is if you listen to the production, the reason why too is everything is just turned up to 10 with the guitar, and you got that little bass and the drum beat and the rhythm in the background, but all it is just one big guitar boom.
That's
like
right.
You said.
It's nauseating after a while.
That's the thing. I mean, like you said, you can listen to a few songs. Okay, wow, this is amazing what they can do. But to listen to 10 to 12 songs, when usually those songs can be usually anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes each because of that, it's just it's overkill. You know what I mean? To me, it's too much. And so
one of my kind of newer, obviously we're talking about the Legacy Act, but one of my newer guitar players that I'm into is a British guy called Andy James, which I think toured with Metallica on some of the British shows in Europe. I could be wrong on the dates, but he's worth checking out. Andy James, he's like a heavier Satriani, but incredible player. So anybody likes that kind of nuance is Andy James. And I'm laughing, Matt, too, that we kind of, like Matt and I put a script in place and we just have more or less segments. And Lizzy, Shrapnel, Shredders is not on the segments, by the way.
No, none of this was.
We just ended up going there for fucking some reason.
That's how the best stuff comes out, right?
Man.
You're playing too much, you can almost tell it is planned.
Yeah.
You don't want to plan.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. But
it's funny.
Cool.